Hey guys, so for this video I want to do the water abrasion technique. I just put this out in the hot sun for a couple hours. If it's a cold, cool studio environment, you may want to wait a lot longer, up to like overnight. But on a hot sunny day, and if you thicken up your shellac by evaporating off the alcohol, it tends to set up a little bit more quickly. So also it helps if your pot is bone dry. Fully bone dry. Okay, so let's get to it. I'm going to use an elephant ear sponge. I like these because they're very soft. A synthetic sponge is a little more kind of abrasive, I feel like, to the shellac, and it pulls more of the shellac off the piece, which you don't want. So a nice soft elephant ear sponge is the thing to do. The other thing I like to do is I'll do this on a banding wheel, and I like to use a plaster bat. So it could be a plaster bat like for the wheel head, or just a piece of plaster that you have laying around. But if you don't have one, it's not a big deal. But what it does is any water from the sponge when I'm wiping the piece will just get sucked up right into the bat, rather than like the foot of the pot sitting in water. If you can't quite get that worked out, a plaster bat, another thing you can do is just shellac the whole bottom of the pot, and that will help protect the foot. So you don't want to use too much water at any one time. So I have my jar upside down now, and I'm just gonna start to wipe at the surface. You don't want water dripping off the sponge, but you do need a very wet sponge, because it's the water in the sponge that pulls the clay from the surface. So just slow, careful, not a lot of pressure, and it's good to go in a little bit of a circular pattern sometimes too, just because it'll give you access to all those little like nooks and crannies around the brush strokes. You can see this is starting to pull up some relief now. So you don't have to go crazy here. Like, if you see an edge, like the shellac really has no thickness. It's like extremely, extremely thin coat, even when it's applied thickly like we did. So if you see an edge to your brush stroke, that's probably enough. You know, if you want to do more, you certainly can, and you'll get even more of a glaze response. But you don't have to like abrade half the pot's thickness away to get this technique to work by any means. It's much better to just do many gentle passes than to really start to work at the surface aggressively. Like, you don't want to push, you just want to let the water slowly dissolve the clay particles on the surface of the dry piece and just coax them off onto the sponge. It's a gentle thing. Now, your clay will respond to this differently depending on what type of clay it is. So this is a porcelain, and it's pretty fine. It still actually has a surprising amount of granular material in it for a porcelain, but it is pretty fine. So if you have like a stoneware or something that has a lot of grog, or an earthenware, it's gonna make kind of a mess. It's gonna be like a really rough sandpapery surface, because all of the fine particles that allow the smooth throwing surface to be there at all are going to be removed first, and then the larger particles will be left behind. So you'll end up with this like sandpaper. So that's why you want to use a fine-grained clay, like a porcelain clay, for this. Notice how there's no water running down this piece? There's nothing on the bat. I mean, it's absorbent, but you know, when water hits the bat, you can see it. So there's no water running down and sitting in a pool here. You got to be really conscious of water use here, because just water sitting on a bone dry piece will dissolve the piece and lead to all kinds of problems. So just nice and careful and dry, and just as much water as it takes. I also think it's good to move in a couple different directions. Just gives the little bit of texture that the sponge has like an opportunity to kind of work at the different angles of the brush strokes. So now we're really starting to get some nice depth to the surface. You can see the shadow on either side of this line, right? Like, that's a fairly high relief surface. So that'll really show up with glaze. That's gonna look great. I'm just gonna flip this over now and start to work on the shoulder. The other thing is after every kind of wipe across the surface, like I'll do a couple passes like this, and then I need to either find a clean area of the sponge. You can see this area of the sponge has clay, right? That's not gonna pull off any more clay from the surface. It's just gonna kind of work at abrading the shellac. So you have to turn your sponge, find a new part of your sponge, or if you have a flat spot on your sponge that you like for this process, clean your sponge regularly. So I just do 2 or 3 little wipes and then back in the water bucket. So if you're doing a particular design where you want kind of more relief happening, like you can see this area here, this is a brush stroke where the shellac didn't connect to the piece all the way through the brush stroke, right? So it like leaves these marks, these sort of like incomplete brush stroke marks, and I love how that looks. It's like very, I don't know, it looks like a print or something, like a print that didn't quite register. It's a really cool effect. So I really like that. So you can kind of do that intentionally by making incomplete marks. There's all kinds of things. You could do this with stamping. You don't have to use a brush either. You can do, you can use stamping and stencils, and I mean, there's like no end to what you can do with this technique. So definitely experiment. So this is really eating away all those little squares that I left behind, and it makes this like really cool, really amazing kind of an architectural effect that yeah, it came out even better than I hoped. Looks great. Oh, okay, so I just had a little area let go, a little area of shellac break away from the surface. So that's kind of bound to happen at some point, so I just want to point it out to you. So you can see right here, this little curl, it's gone now, right? Like I accidentally pulled it away with the sponge. So that's bound to happen. So if you have an area like that that's critical to your design or whatever you're working on, you can go and put that back in, let it dry, and then continue abrading, and it may give you like a similar, it may solve the problem for you. I'm not going to worry about it too much on this piece, but I just wanted to mention that the finer your brush strokes get, right? Like it didn't happen too much down below, but the finer the brush strokes get, the less ability the shellac has to hold on. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed watching the water abrasion part of this process. I think it's like one of the coolest things out there, using the shellac for to create a relief. Brushwork relief, right? It's like amazing. So there's another cool step you can do that I'm not going to demonstrate here, but I just want to talk about briefly. I could put down another coat of something here and then use more shellac, or I could just add more shellac and keep abrading. So say I added a band of shellac right here, right, and then abraded below that band, I would end up with like a level below this part of the vine, and then like a shelf, and then it would go down even further. So you can like do this again, basically is what I'm trying to say. Another really cool technique is you can put a colored slip down now and then wipe that away, and then some of it will get caught in and around the recesses. And yet another thing you can do is put a colored slip down and then do another pattern or pattern element, or do squares, or do any number of things, and then do the resist again. So if you put a colored slip and draw on top of it with shellac, that surface will be behind the vines, but it will also be kind of protected by its coat of shellac as well. So there's a lot of really interesting ways to layer with this process. You're always going to start with the foreground, so like in this case the vines would be the foreground, and then anything you put down next will be behind that. So that's just another kind of amazing thing to explore. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. For the next shellac demonstration, I'm going to be doing some glaze resist with shellac. So what's kind of different from this to that is what I'll be able to do is put a coat of glaze down, wax some areas of glaze, and then just wash the rest of the glaze out under the sink. So you can do this with wax, but it doesn't work nearly as well as with shellac. And some waxes won't let you do it at all. So it works great. I'll be using one of my new pieces, and I'll be doing color blocks basically over the geometric shapes in some of my in one of my bowls, my current pieces. So okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.